You're listening to the Extraordinary Everyday Podcast with Wendy Johnson, episode number 67.
Welcome to the Extraordinary Everyday Podcast, where women come to be inspired and motivated to become the best version of themselves and elevate the quality of their everyday. Now, here's your host, certified life coach, Wendy Johnson.
Hello, beautiful friends. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. We're talking about cognitive distortions, those sneaky, often unnoticed ways our thinking can get distorted and lead us down paths of unnecessary stress, anxiety, or even self-doubt. Now, if you're thinking, I don't think this happens to me, trust me, it does. We all have these thought patterns from time to time. And today I want to help you identify some of these distortions, understand why they matter, and learn how to shift them. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that this topic connects to the work we're doing in the More You membership, where we dig deeper into these kind of mindset shifts. And if you haven't already, make sure to grab your free mindset makeover download. It's a great way to start shifting your mindset today. Let's get started. Okay, so first things first, what are cognitive distortions? Cognitive distortions are essentially biased ways of thinking about ourselves and the world around us. They're irrational thought patterns that can cause us to perceive reality inaccurately, often in a more negative light than is actually necessary. These distorted thoughts can lead to negative emotions like frustration, sadness, or fear. They're also super sneaky because they often feel true in the moment, which makes them hard to recognize. But once you start noticing them, you can challenge them. And that's where the magic happens. Today, I'm going to break down some of the most common cognitive distortions and show you how they might be affecting your everyday life. Let's dive into the 10 most common distortions. As I go through these, think about whether you recognize any of them in your own life, because I definitely do in my own. Number one, all or nothing thinking. This is also known as black and white thinking. With all or nothing thinking, you're seeing things in absolute terms. You're either a complete success or a total failure. For example, imagine you've been trying to stick to a new diet plan. You have one day where you fall off the wagon and you indulge in something off of your plan. And instead of seeing it as a small slip, you think, I've completely ruined my diet. I might as well quit. Everything is either perfect or ruined. There's no middle ground. I've definitely been there with my personal goals. If I didn't get everything perfectly right, I'd feel like a failure. But what I learned is that progress isn't always linear, and that's okay. We have slip-ups. The second one is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization happens when we make a sweeping conclusion based on a single event. Let's say you didn't get that promotion you were hoping for, and suddenly you're thinking, I'll never get promoted again. My career is doomed. I've struggled with this one too. Back in my 20s, early 30s, there was a time in my career when a few setbacks made me feel when I'd never get to where I wanted to be. But looking back, I realized how much those experiences actually helped me grow. One setback does not define your entire future. The third one is mental filtering. This is when you focus exclusively on the negatives and ignore anything positive. Maybe you receive a bunch of compliments on a project but one person criticizes it. And that's all you can think about is that one criticism. You're filtering out all the good, positive things people said about you, and you're only holding on to the bad. I've had a client do this with her work environment. She had a dozen positive reviews, and she let that one negative comment overshadow everything. It's easy to let the negatives take center stage, but recognizing when you do this, you can shift the habit and focus on the positive. The fourth is disqualifying the positive. Here you reject positive experiences by insisting they don't count. Let's say someone compliments you at work, and instead of accepting it, you think, oh, they're just being nice. It really wasn't true. Or when you do get a compliment, you immediately have a reason for why you don't think it's a compliment, and you downplay the compliments. Let's say someone praises you for your work and you brush it off like it wasn't deserved. What you want to do is recognize the positive feedback and say thank you. It does not mean you're arrogant. It means that you're recognizing your own worth. And the fifth distortion is jumping to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions comes in two forms: mind reading and fortune telling. With mind reading, you assume you know what someone else is thinking. Like, they never responded to my text. They must be mad at me, even though there's no evidence to support that. With fortune telling, you predict something bad will happen before it even does. I hear people do this one all the time. You've probably heard a person say, this is going to be a disaster. I'll forget everything I have to say when I get up to speak. They're predicting their future, that they're going to flop and they're going to fail. You want to realize that you're jumping to conclusions and you're predicting a future and making it a doomsday future. Most of the time, realize this, the outcome is far better than you'll ever expect. And the sixth distortion is catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when you expect the worst case scenario to happen. Imagine you're running late to a meeting and you got stuck in traffic and you immediately think, I'm going to get fired for this because I already received a warning that I couldn't be late. In one of my earlier careers, I had an hour commute, and there were several times that it was not my fault. I left in plenty of time, but they would shut the road down due to a major road collision or death. And I used to take these small issues and magnify them, blowing them way out of proportion, thinking that, oh, I'm going to be late and they're going to fire me, which is never the case because it happened to all of us. But I was thinking of the worst case scenario. But when I started asking myself, is this really as bad as I'm making it out to be? I realized that often I was overreacting to minor situations that were out of my control. The seventh distortion is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when you assume your feelings reflect your reality. For example, if you feel anxious about a social event, you conclude, I must not belong here. This is the wrong group for me. But just because you feel nervous doesn't mean that something is wrong. This one is so powerful. Almost everybody gets the jitters before they enter an event because they're walking into an enormous gathering of people And there's going to be a lot of people you know, and maybe a lot of people you don't know. I've had moments where I let anxiety convince me I wasn't prepared for something, when in fact, it was just a normal reaction to stepping outside of my comfort zone. That I'm always going to get the butterflies, no matter what it is. The eighth distortion is should statements. Should statements involve placing rigid expectations on yourself or others. You might think, I should always have the answers, or I should never make mistakes. Every week, I come across a person who shoulds on themselves. And those shoulds weigh people down. They're putting constraints on themselves and being hard on themselves and punishing themselves. How many times in a day have you heard yourself that you should do something? Begin to pay attention to this word and try to take it out of your vocabulary. Reframe them as preferences rather than as rules. The ninth distortion is labeling. This is a biggie. Labeling happens when we assign negative labels to ourselves or others. Let's say you make a mistake and think, I'm such an idiot, instead of, I made a mistake, and admitting that you made a mistake rather than calling yourself an idiot. Or you hear other people call each other idiots. You see a bad driver on the road and you call them an idiot. Or what I hate to hear is a parent saying that to their children and calling them an idiot, or a spouse saying that to another spouse. Labeling is very harsh, and it's something that you want to notice if you're doing it in your own life to yourself and to others. The 10th distortion is personalization. Personalization is when you blame yourself for events outside your control. Your friend is in a bad mood and you assume it's because of something you did, even though there's no real evidence. Maybe there are times when somebody you live with, your child or your spouse, is in a bad mood and you assume that you've done something wrong, but you don't want to take responsibility for other people's emotions. You don't want to think if they're upset, it's because of me. What you want to do is know that other people's emotions often have nothing to do with us. And you just have to let them learn to work through their own emotions. Okay, so now that we've gone through these distortions, let's talk about why they matter. Cognitive distortions don't just live in our heads. They shape how we feel, how we act, and even what we believe about ourselves and the world. I've experienced firsthand how subtle these distortions can be. These distortions can feed into stress, anxiety, and a fixed mindset. They make small problems seem huge and prevent us from seeing the good in ourselves and in the situations we face. And many of these distortions affect your relationships with your loved ones and your friends and your coworkers. But once you start identifying them, you can shift them. And that's when you start to feel more at peace and self-compassion. So how do we start overcoming these distortions? It takes awareness, practice, and a little bit of kindness toward ourselves. Here are 5 steps you can take. And the first one is awareness, knowing what the cognitive distortions are. And then as you go about your days, you're noticing your thoughts and you catch yourself. Pay attention to your thinking patterns and see if any of these distortions are coming up. The second step is to challenge your thoughts. When you notice a distorted thought, ask yourself, is this really true? Or what evidence do I have that supports or contradicts this thought? And the third step is to reframe the thought. Shift that negative thought to something more balanced. There's always good, there's always positive. So look for the positive in the situation. If you're thinking, I'll never get this right, try reframing it to, I'm still learning, and that's okay. And the fourth step is to use positive self-talk. Replace harsh should statements with gentler, more realistic phrases. Instead of, I should never make mistakes, try, it's okay to make mistakes as part of the learning process. And the fifth step is to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness helps you observe your thoughts without judgment. You learn to notice them and let them go rather than getting caught up in them. With practice, these steps can become second nature, and you'll start to see a shift in how you think, feel, and react to your challenges. We talked about priorities in a recent episode. I believe it's episode number 65. And cognitive distortions can play a big role in how we approach them. If you're stuck in a cycle of distorted thinking, it's harder to stay focused on what truly matters. Clearing these mental blocks helps us align our thoughts with our values and keeps our priorities in focus. So if you're struggling with staying true to your priorities, start by noticing how your thoughts might be getting in the way. And to conclude, cognitive distortions are something we all deal with, but recognizing them is the first step to breaking free. Remember, these distorted thoughts don't define you, and they're not the truth. You have the power to shift them. If you want to dive deeper into this work, don't forget to download the Mindset Makeover or join us in the membership, More You, where we can get into these kind of mindset shifts. And I want to leave you with a quote. Your thoughts shape your reality, but you have the power to change them. By recognizing and challenging cognitive distortions, you can shift from self-doubt to self-compassion and begin to see the world with clearer, more balanced eyes. Thank you so much for listening, friends. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with a friend or leave a review. It helps me to continue bringing you content that makes a difference. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, you have to come check out More You, my community of like-minded women. We show up to create the highest version of ourselves and elevate the quality of our everyday along the way. Head over to ontraclifecoaching.com/join. That's ontraclifecoaching.com/join. I'd love to see you in there. And if you haven't grabbed your copy of the Mindset Makeover, head over to ontraclifecoaching.com/makeover and get a copy that teaches and inspires you to show up as your most extraordinary self.